gentlemen, and our fellow doctors. Welcome to episode 23 of Decoding AI in Healthcare series. I'm Hedvisha, your host, and today we are embarking on an exciting journey into the future of AI in healthcare. AI is transforming healthcare in ways we only once dreamed of. And today we are thrilled to explore these possibilities with some of the brightest minds in the field. First up, we have Joshua Anang, a 17-year-old innovative founder and CEO of ChatDoc. Joshua is leading the charge with an AI-driven healthcare assistant that is breaking new ground and providing accessible information-based care globally. His vision for ChatDoc's future is incredibly inspiring, and we cannot wait to dive into it. So, welcome, Joshua, and we are so thrilled to have you.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
Joining us next is Dr. Mark DiMauro, an assistant professor at the University of Pittsburgh-Johnstown, who spends his time at the fascinating intersection of technology and humanity. Mark's work in AI, data science, and digital humanities has garnered international attention, and he brings a unique perspective to our discussions today. So, welcome, Mark. We're thrilled to have you.
Thank you so much. I'm really excited to be here.
Finally, we have Dr. Dipu Patel, a renowned digital health consultant known for her innovative blend of clinical expertise and tech-driven patient empowerment. Welcome, Dr. Dipu.
Thank you, Hedvi. I am so honored to be here, and especially with these two guests who not only represent what the future of healthcare and AI is, but also what the future of education is going to look like with AI. So without further ado, let's dive right in. I'll throw the first question out to you, Mark. Can you share your thoughts on how AI is transforming the landscape in your field, in your field of digital humanities? And maybe before answering that, perhaps clarify for our audience who may not know what digital humanities is.
Absolutely. Thank you for the question. So digital humanities is essentially the intersection of math, computer science, and cultural studies. Essentially, instead of doing what a traditional literary scholar does, because my PhD is in literature, which would be, for example, critically reading text and then responding to them, through an essay or content or something of that nature. Instead, what we do is we look for patterns in data sets, and usually that involves writing computer algorithms that read the text for us, or deploying, ready-made algorithms, and then analyzing the data from the other end. Essentially, it's the same thing that a data scientist would do in like marketing context, for example. But rather than pointing it with a kind of sales focus, we point it at the idea that we can better understand human culture by understanding the underlying patterns that makes us do what we do. So that's kind of DH in a very rapid nutshell, but it includes things like machine learning, data science, AI.
So in terms of transforming this space, how is AI doing that for you?
The way I like to describe AI to those who are just kind of, putting their toes in the pool of what it is, it's an automated, steerable, trainable communication platform. So think about anything that you do on the day-to-day, whether it's, in your job or interpersonal relationships, anything that involves communication. And in some form or fashion, if you could train, steer, and automate that, what would that look like? And ultimately, it's going to affect everything. The hot button topic in education right now is plagiarism, discussion, ethics, that sort of thing, which I will touch upon later. But for the most part, assignment quality, creation of lessons, curriculum design, even things so far as creating accommodations for students who require them, all of it is going to be affected in some way or another. And it's an exciting time for sure.
For sure. Joshua, what's your take? You in many ways represent the future of not only of what our students are learning, but you're actually pioneering some work. So how is it impacting the work that you're doing?
Hold on. Can you repeat what you just said a little? I'm facing connection problems. Yeah.
Sure. I know. So I was just asking the same question of you of how you think AI is impacting the healthcare landscape and especially through your lens as an entrepreneur in building ChatDoc?
Oh, okay. So I'll start off in the medical imaging space. At first, the human eye was used to diagnose and analyze medical images. But now, with the use of computer vision algorithms, medical images can be analyzed and diagnosed with computer level speed and accuracy, surpassing that of the human doctor. And recently, Google DeepMind announced a new AI algorithm called the AlphaFold algorithm to solve the protein folding problem. And how does this solve this problem? It utilizes deep learning techniques to predict protein structures based on their amino acid sequences. And it has enhanced drug discovery and genetic research by boosting our understanding of genetic diseases and in fundamental biology, which dives deeper into the mechanisms of life at the molecular level by providing insights on how proteins interact with cells. And mostly it's like what I'm working on, which is ChatDoc, is in the generative AI space. It's tied around providing AI health assistance instead of human doctors. So in this case, a patient wouldn't need to visit the hospital in order to get access to healthcare information to improve their health. Instead, they have an AI assistant they can constantly communicate with in order to acquire that service. I've seen other companies doing this, like Sword Health and Hippocratic AI, and Hippocratic AI has shown substantial results as compared to the actual human nurse.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Yeah. And, I think part of the space of generative AI that is really AI has been around for a really long time. It's the generative aspect of it that has really taken us by surprise, I guess, for some of us, and not so surprising for some of us. And Mark, and I think, as Joshua was talking about AlphaFold, one of the things and that's from the scientific lens, but you had mentioned the integration of AI into literature and the culture that's influencing research and education in the humanities. You and I have talked about many classic literary works, everything from Moby Dick to Shakespearean work that you have kind of alluded to and worked in fact, written a play using several tools that you were developing and building yourself. And that's contributing to the literary research that we're doing through the lens of AI. Can you speak to that and give us some examples of what you have been doing?
Sure, absolutely. So I'll start with the example you alluded to, which was the drama. Sophocles, the Greek playwright, has, according to historical sources, over 120 plays to his credit. Of those, we have 5 fully intact texts, and we have fragmentary portions of a number of other, depending on the source you ask, between 20 and 60 different copies. And each of those various copies is present in some cases, nothing more than a title, and in some cases, about half the play. Well, essentially, the project that I did, this was just presented at the University of Pittsburgh-Johnstown last November, at the end of November, was I trained an AI, specifically GPT-4, which was the most advanced at the time. I trained it to write in the diction and using the vocabulary in the direction of Sophocles. Then I used extant historical sources to tell me what the play was supposed to do. It was the Homeric hymn to Hermes, the play's title was Searcher. And I completed the play as if Sophocles would have written. So essentially, we have access now to a text that has vanished from the face of the earth, right? There is no copy. There's no historical record. We believe it was destroyed when the Library of Alexandria was destroyed, but we don't know that for sure. But we now have access to the closest facsimile we could possibly get with that text. It's like a form of literary necromancy, if you will. You've probably heard of these sort of discussions with other artists. For example, the Beatles came up real big with that exact same sort of application. But this is just one of the ways that we can deploy this technology, because obviously it finds, mimics, and then embodies patterns. And those patterns are present within everything, whether they be scientific, DNA, like Josh was alluding to, physics. Stephen Wolfram spends a lot of time discussing that, or in my case, language, literature, culture. I mean, once you know it, you can represent it. And once you represent it, you can create nearly anything. To me, that's the real power of this technology, is its ability to embody and encompass things that quite literally don't exist yet, just based off of a predictive modeling pattern. That's I love that. I love living the future.
Yeah, and I find it very. I read parts of the play that you had written, I think one of the things that we want to make clear is that this is not about removing the creative process from writing and literary writing and literature. In fact, it's somehow enhancing it so that creativity that you may not have thought of, and you can add to the work that is being created, and then really keeping the human aspect in the loop. And so
Right.
I want to make it clear that we're not trying to plagiarize, we're not trying to rewrite Shakespeare or any sort of literary classic. It's around really gaining a deeper understanding and how we can move that creative process forward through the use of technology.
Precisely, because at the end of the day, we created a text. We can now read a text we could never read before, and think about the historical insight that gives us. That's immeasurably valuable. That's right. So in terms of creating things, so I'm going to turn to you, Joshua, it's an interesting conversation to have at the cusp of humanities and healthcare, both which are very near and dear, and I enjoy them. Obviously, I practice healthcare, but humanities is something I really draw upon on many of my lectures. So what inspired you to create ChatDoc, and how do you envision it evolving in the next 5 years or so? You're fairly young in your career, entrepreneurial career, let alone I'm sure you'll have many careers, but what inspired you to create ChatDoc?
Well, I didn't like visiting the hospital very much over the past few years. Sometimes I'd have to spend 5 hours just to get a 5-minute consultation.
To our listeners, I believe there is a lot of rain where Joshua is, so we may be experiencing some technical issues. There you are.
Would also benefit from drugs, because I realize that drugs. Is there a problem? Hello, can you?
Yes, go ahead, Joshua. What inspired you to start ChatDoc? Go ahead.
I disliked visiting the hospital because I'd have to spend 5 hours to get a 5-minute consultation, and it was hectic. I wanted to bring the doctor into my own hands. I wanted to have access to the information that could help me improve my health. So that's what inspired ChatDoc. And I noticed that drugs could have side effects on humans in the future. So I wanted to find a way to improve my health without ever falling sick or without ever having to take any drugs. And I noticed that people actually improve their health and heal themselves based on their lifestyle. So where do I get the information to improve my health and make the right decisions that will be through an AI health assistant. That's what inspired ChatDoc. So ChatDoc will provide me with the information that will guide me to make the right decisions to live a healthy lifestyle. That way I wouldn't have to visit a hospital very much.
So, in
the next few years,
Go ahead, sorry.
In the next few years, I hope that ChatDoc will be on every single device, like a normal thing, like how everyone can have healthcare insurance. And if smart homes actually become a thing, possibly ChatDoc will be integrated inside of their homes and, serve the entire household, not just one person.
Yeah. Do you, in terms of your primary target market, you're based out of Ghana, I believe, and what, in terms of your primary target market, what are the plans for you to expand this service?
Well, my primary target market is the United States, actually. It's a great market. I've done a lot of research there, and I think it's the best place to start off. And in order to expand into global markets, I need to have a strong foundation. That's why I decided to choose the United States.
Excellent. Also, lots of regulatory hurdles. So you've chosen a challenging yet very gratifying market, I will say. So kudos to you on definitely, pursuing that. And that reminds me of something about, like, as we think about the challenges of AI, Mark, you and I have discussed offline a number of ways that AI can enhance learning experiences. But what are some of the ways that you have personally used AI in your course? So perhaps a recent project for your students that you've combined AI with cultural and literary studies and some key outcomes.
Excellent. Yeah, so there are so many. I'm actually speaking at the.
There are. He's not kidding. There are so many.
I'll be speaking at a conference this coming August about that, some sort of the integration with AI and pedagogical practices. But there's a couple kind of high points that I'll hit on, and then I'll talk about the actual project. So the biggest high point is the efficiency boost. And I think this is something that a lot of people, they subsume it, they imagine it, but they don't see it put into practice. And essentially it's this: when students have access to AI tools and augmented assignments and pedagogy, their work gets done faster because it's an efficiency boost. What does that mean when student work gets done faster? You can cover more within a semester. So actually the ability to make each individual class, each lesson, each project mean more and have more of a positive learning outcome because you can integrate so many more pieces into it, that's invaluable. That's something that we haven't had access to before, because even the semester schedule for a university professor is gauged around how much work a student can do in a certain amount of time. That's why we choose the text we choose. That's why we assign what we assign, because logistics, that's the part that governs us. But AI allows us to break that pattern. It allows us to incorporate significantly more content. As far as an example of a lesson that does exactly that, I'll choose my personal favorite because I'm a big kind of puzzle game guy. Ciphers are one of my hobbies. They're something that I particularly enjoy. It's just a hobby of mine. And there are a number of historical ciphers. Probably the most famous one is the Voynich manuscript, but there's a number out there. Essentially, what we can do now, and what I've tasked my digital humanities students to do for about 3 semesters now, is they use artificial intelligence, a neural cipher identifier, to select a cipher from a historic unbroken cipher text. Once they know that, they can use brute force software to attempt to break it, and ultimately couple that with humanities historical research that says who these people are, where they came from, what they were doing, why they made a cipher in the first place, and so on. And then eventually, ultimately, as a group, they present on the project. So you have, research, traditional research methods or historical research methods, which couple the humanities, plus the application of DH ideas. And I do want to be clear here, I don't grade them on whether or not they can actually break the cipher. Because that's really
well, it's unbroken for a reason, right? After
exactly,
all these...
yeah, for a couple hundred years. Yeah, I'm more interested in how they deploy the tools and their intuition, their critical thinking skills, and they take to it really well. There's been quite a few really, really good attempts at some of these historical ciphers. The Labousse cryptogram, for example, one of my personal favorites, because it's literal pirate treasure. So someday, given enough classes that take a shot at it, maybe we'll just find it.
Someone's going to break it. One of you said a buzzword for me, especially in healthcare, as a healthcare educator and a practitioner, critical thinking, right? There is a lot of fear around AI and using the tools of AI, in the fear that as we teach healthcare, the critical thinking aspect of healthcare is going to be diminished in some way. And in fact, I think it's the opposite, right? The time that you were saying in a semester that we have to accomplish perhaps a few more assignments than we typically would, the efficiency that you gain in the time actually deepens the critical thinking aspect of it. And so the fear actually has been unfounded, at least in my experience in delivering and asking students to use AI tools. In fact, one of the things I'm finding in a course that I'm teaching is that the students actually don't want to use the AI tool. They want to create their own, their own post or assignment or whatever, which is great. But also you want to make sure that they're really gaining the benefits of using AI, because it's only through the use of it that you're going to understand what the pros and cons of using that particular tool are going to be. In your case, breaking a cipher. In my case, creating a project implementation plan and making sure that the nuances of that plan are actually implemented. And so in that regard, Joshua, as you're looking at the developing and as you're developing ChatDoc and using the various generative AI tools, what are some of the outcomes that you are seeing in terms of applying these concepts in your particular product?
Well, I hope to improve health outcomes in general by providing aggregated information to empower individuals to make informed decisions about their health. So generally, we're not necessarily replacing doctors, or we're not necessarily providing health care just yet, but we're providing the necessary guidance and information that individuals would require to make themselves healthier.
Right. Yeah. And in terms of addressing some of the ethical considerations for a tool such as ChatDoc, healthcare providers and patients in general are a little skeptical of gaining their advice from a bot, right? In fact, I'll be the first to say that I tell patients not to Google things when I see them, because they come in with, I've had a sore throat for 2 days. I think I have cancer, which is of course not the case most of the time. And so in terms of understanding balancing the ethical and moral and legal considerations for a product such as yours, what are some of the challenges or things that you're seeing that as we begin to integrate these sorts of tools into our daily lives?
Well, before we can commercialize in general, we have to go through the exit process of acquiring clinical validation, which will mean testing the efficacy of our models, making sure that it's making the right predictions to prevent any further complications. And that's part of the FDA approval process that we will eventually be going through. And most importantly is, where do we source our data? So we need trustable sources. We need to work with physicians and clinicians to get the required data, which can make accurate predictions on people's diseases or providing the required information that they will need to improve their health.
Yeah. And also, text sources are not the only sources of data, right? Especially in healthcare, data evolves and shifts so quickly in real time. Back in the day, we used to use Harrison's. Harrison's is no longer just enough as the Bible of medicine. Although it's helpful to train a model, you still need real-time data, or real data, I should say, not real-time data, but real data in order to make some of these decisions. And that brings me to pivoting just slightly, Mark, around, I think Joshua is skirting or tangentially talking about sentiment analysis. And so if you wouldn't mind explaining to our audience what sentiment analysis is and pattern recognition in the context of, if you dare to go into the healthcare, I know you're not a healthcare person, but if you have an example, that's great. Otherwise, a digital humanities example would be great.
Sure. So sentiment analysis is a data science methodology, and it's been mostly subsumed into generative AI, but there are still companies that perform it. And essentially what it is in a business context, it will scrape things like social media posts and feeds and news feed. And it finds, scraping, by the way, is a term for scouring the internet for methodology. But once it, collects all these terms.
That's a valid description, a valid segue to have and describe it, yes.
Once it collects all these terms, essentially it looks for, within what we call a linguistic vector, which is a section of words, how many times is product X mentioned with a positive adjective, for example. And what it does is it's almost like keeping your finger on the pulse of the cultural conversation, like the trending page on X, for example. It tells you what people are talking about it and what they think about it. What is the sentiment analysis? So, for example, if your company has a new press release, you can run a sentiment analytic and say, essentially, people love this. They're responding well to it. You have access to a metric that isn't just, did our sales go up, right? It's a really good KPI. So that's what sentiment analysis essentially structures and is used for. But nowadays, that kind of entire process has been subsumed by Gen AI as well, because you can use sentiment analysis is one portion of Gen AI. Because, for example, when you put something into ChatGPT or ChatDoc, It needs to read what is being said and then take that information and then say, this is a positive sentiment, this is a negative sentiment, and then respond accordingly. So in terms of digital humanities, it's really effective to say, for example, does my essay sound good, right? Not from a, is my research good or my sources correct aspect, is my content accurate, but is this going to resonate with someone? Is this good rhetoric? Speech writer, for example, if you need to get up and give a speech, do a sentiment analysis on it because it will give you an idea of how people will respond in that current cultural moment, which is a really powerful tool to have. It's just one of those. It's one of those tools that, when properly deployed, all of these tools are in this category, by the way. When properly deployed, they are frighteningly powerful for what you can do, and amazing.
And one of the things that is sentiment analysis is actually, as you said, it's powerful, but it's particularly important in healthcare, especially if we're delivering healthcare through a bot, right? That analysis and the tone with which it delivers a text, right? At least at this point, text, voice hasn't quite made its way into, but in text, that tone is going to matter. And so sentiment analysis does play a pretty large role in the background in terms of giving advice and I think that's what Joshua was alluding to in the background, right? You want people to use it. People are going to use it if they feel comfortable, not only with the accuracy of the data, right? Because obviously that's important, but the tone in which it's delivered, and that's what sentiment analysis does for some of the products. And you don't want a rude bot, right? And so in terms of, can you, Mark, is there an example you can give me and give our audience in terms of how you use sentiment analysis and digital humanities?
Sure, absolutely. Actually, you know what? Let's talk, in fact, I'll talk healthcare for a minute there, just for that same application, because the Venn diagram crosses over quite a bit there.
Yes, I love it.
If you're delivering news to a patient, you can consider sentiment analysis to be the literal bedside manner of the virtual physician, right? Is it going to deliver bad news with a blunt affect that just goes, wow, that was the worst news delivered in the worst possible way? Or is it going to be able to integrate precisely how someone is likely to react to, particularly damaging news about their health or a loved one's health or something like that, and effectively sugarcoat it, right? These are processes that we do. They're part of our rhetoric because we have empathy for one another. Obviously, a large language model has no empathy, but through sentiment analysis, we can simulate it. And we can create something that doesn't feel like it's hitting you with just blunt information, know this or else, right? That kind of feeling. Instead, we can give it some rhetoric. We can tweak it, play with it, and give it accurate information, clarity, but also deliver in a way that doesn't feel like it's just going to bowl you over. That's one of the best ways to do it and apply it. And in BH, it's used for precisely the same reason. If you ever need to modify or modulate the tone or the content level, the rhetoric, or like I said, speeches, essays, communicative platform, one of my favorite applications is if you are designing a role play agent. So let's say, for example, you work in HR, right? And you need to train someone how to fire people. That's not a fun training to do, right? But what you can do, you can train an HR agent with all of the policies and procedures of the company, and then also load it with sentiment that allows it to deliver bad news like that in a relatively, I want to call it comforting. It's never comforting to be fired, but less damaging way, right? That's a great way to deploy tech like this because bad news needs to be delivered like any other news. And this is a great way to make people more comfortable with it.
Yes, for training purposes. So I just want to, again, to clarify for our audience, we're not saying that humans should not be in this. We're saying for purely training purposes, there's no pink slip bot coming your way anytime soon. So
that's a great clarification.
Yeah, exactly. And I think, and that's what I think Joshua's company is doing, right? ChatDoc. I think the ultimate goal is to have these tools accessible to everyone in their homes, as Joshua was saying. But it's going to take time to kind of train these models to get to a level where we would trust the advice the tone in which that advice was given to us. And so, as we're moving forward into the arena of healthcare, really, we're finally, I think, in that realm. And Joshua, tell me what you're seeing in the landscape. Healthcare is finally starting to accept that AI is here to stay. Because there's a lot of like, don't tell me anything about this. And especially in healthcare, we're very, very change averse. But I think there's an acceptance that's happening. I akin it to the 5 stages of grief. So acceptance is happening in healthcare. And as at least I'm seeing it, what are some of the challenges that you're facing when you're developing a tool such as ChatDoc? And how are you trying to overcome them?
Well, one of the main problems is with trust. Like you mentioned, people don't really trust chatbots or large language models. So we're trying to make it sound, we're trying to source our data from trustable sources, like I mentioned. That'll increase the amount of trust that people have in our product. And getting FDA approval is also another important factor, because once people see that you have FDA approval, then they have this trust that, oh, what you're doing is genuine, that I can actually take your word or your information. And yeah.
Absolutely.
That's one of our major.
Yeah, trust is such a big thing in any tool that we're using, right? I mean, I'm trying to think back to when I had my first iPhone, and it was just a miraculous feeling that I could do all these things on the phone, right? I mean, I am old enough. Well, I'm older than both of you, and so I'm old enough to remember that feeling. You guys probably just had like a, oh great, this is my third one, whatever, But like, I remember having to kind of dial on the thing, and so when I had this computer in my hands, it was a surreal feeling. But there was also a sense of trust, and like I didn't trust it fully to remember the things. And I akin it to, I had a professor when I was in school who we went from the slide projector where we would write our notes on the thing, and they would, and then they would take the plastic sheet off the slide projector, to using PowerPoint, and to actually believing that when you hit save, it would save the PowerPoint, right? That is a difficult flip if you've only used this physical thing your entire career, right? And so I akin this technology to that, even though I feel like we have gone through several evolution. I am not a boomer. I just want to make that clear to everyone. But I totally get the anxiety of a generation removed who has had to kind of go through several iterations of this technology. And then you add healthcare to it, you add education to it, you add the complexities of each of these systems and landscapes on top of it, and it becomes a really, really difficult thing to trust fully. And I think the experimentation that we end up doing and the tinkering, I think, is going to be the most important aspect of making sure that this technology is not only usable, which it is now, but also trusted for the clarity that it's putting in. Mark, what do you think of that?
That's a really good point, and I'll actually back that up with the idea that and this is something that I emphasize in all my classes, that I want my students to be highly, highly cynical researchers, right? There is a tendency, so for a technology like Google, which has been around for 30 some odd years now, in my opinion, there is a tendency to overtrust that. Just Google it, click the first link, and you're good. That's the right information. And no, that's not how we do correct research. You need to find corroboration. You need to verify. You need to sometimes do research on your research. Who is this person that said this? Are they right? Are they trustworthy? And so on. And the more powerful the technology, the more the tendency to trust it implicitly becomes.
Implicitly, yes.
Yeah, and that's something we have to avoid, because frankly, no source is implicitly trustworthy. I don't care if it came from an academic journal, right? I need to double check it. That's just my research methodology. So I think the break in trust when it comes to using artificial intelligence is the idea that somehow this technology, because it's so powerful, because it feels so human, is going to intentionally fool me or trick me in some way. When in reality, the correct way to approach it, I personally believe, is similar to any emerging technology. Don't trust any of it implicitly. Be responsible, do your research, and if AI delivers the same information as Google, great, you got it. But do want to caution Google is not the arbiter of truth here, right?
I was going to say Google's not the only browser out there, but yes, we use the term Google as we use Band-Aid, right?
Using it as a verb, yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah, you're absolutely right. There is a generational divide there. There's a generational gap for, digesting and trusting this sort of technology. And I would definitely say that is going to improve, just given time and people get more used to these sorts of applications. But overall, that's just solid advice for any technology is trust but verify, to paraphrase the president.
Right. And Joshua, for your generation, I think that this is a big, I think you're going to have different challenges from your generation because you are the digitally native generation. And then some, I think I would say, and so trust and validation and verifying of these tools is going to take on a whole other element, especially for tools like ChatDoc that you're building, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
go ahead.
Like how you mentioned, it's going to be really difficult to adapt when you've already been using something for a really long time now. So for our generation, we might have a better shot because we will be born into the technology. So like the technology will already be there. So adaptation wouldn't necessarily be a problem because that's what we're using. Yeah. But for other people, like you've been visiting a human doctor your entire life and someday an AI doctor just pops up and says, hey, you can use me. It's going to be extremely difficult to adapt to that new way of life or understanding. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that bridge is, I would say in healthcare right now, that bridge is telehealth, right? We went from nothing to during the pandemic, we used it a lot. And now we're kind of reverting back to the in-person. But there are things that I think, I wish we would do a better job at a systems level in terms of harnessing the technology for where it is appropriate. Not every blood pressure check needs to be physically in the office. Not every asthma post-op check or post-asthma flare check needs to be in the office, right? And so there are ways that we need to kind of, and that's part of that tinkering that's happening in healthcare, right? Like we're still playing around with it. And it takes a little bit of time for us to kind of iron out what are the policies and procedures that are going to fall around telehealth. And it's really difficult to kind of turn that ship around on a dime, although we did in COVID. So we were able to really harness it during COVID. So I think the technology is there. It's just a matter of the human will and the policy and regulatory systems, the will of the policies and the regulatory systems to be there. So I'll end with our last question for both of you. Well, I'll start with Joshua. What do you think are going to be the key drivers of AI innovation in the future? And what skills do you think future generations should be developing?
Well, like you mentioned, our generation is going to be the digital generation. And I think we need to start developing innovative and critical thinking skills. Like having the ability to look at a society or look at an environment and spot problems in these environments and figure out ways AI can be helpful. Another ability will be to have the eye to spot invisible infrastructure of the future, which we can use to solve problems and improve life.
Yeah, absolutely. Mark, what about you? What are some key drivers of AI innovation?
So we're exiting the explosion of hype phase, and we are entering the ubiquitous software phase. So at this point, absolutely everyone is instituting AI, take advantage of what they perceive as the market forces. What we haven't seen are the actual market forces, right? When it becomes incumbent upon an educator, like ourselves, to, for example, I want to select this LLM for my classroom the same way we would select a textbook. That's where we're going to see kind of the things begin to separate off into their individual constituent components, and one will elevate over another. I don't think those forces have taken hold yet, because there's still a lot of pushback. There's still a lot of unsurety. To go back to our last question, there's a lack of trust, and so on. But once that starts to become the norm, I think we're going to see that quite a bit more. As far as what continues to drive new innovation within this space, not to sound platitudinous, but it's us, right? The more that we can use this stuff, the more that we can develop it, the more that we can explore it. Doing what Joshua is doing is a fantastic example of exactly that, right? Taking this technology and applying it with that human lens that delivers these fantastic outcomes. That's where I think, we're going to be going in the future, because with any new technology, in order to see the boundaries, to see the limits, you have to explore those boundaries and limits. And that's what I encourage everybody to do. If you're looking for a single skill that people are going to want to use moving forward, the one I would settle on is prompt engineering, because prompt engineering is a fancy way of saying how to properly use a large language model, right? It's essentially the way you want to deliver your content to make the efficiency as high as possible. So if you haven't explored that yet, please do so. It is your how-to instruction manual to get the most out of AI. And once you can get the most out of AI, then you can start seeing way off in the distance and saying, boy, I could use this to X, Y, Z. And that's when the real one.
Right. So I think for me, I agree, Mark. I think for me, it'll be curiosity on behalf of all of us, not just the students, but all of us as educators and learners of new systems, right? I love the idea of, instead of having textbooks, we're going to assign large language models or small language models for our courses. That is an amazing. Can you imagine? Like, why not stop writing textbooks? I mean, I'm not going to say that. I have a book coming out later this fall, so you can do that. We can stop writing textbooks after that. But no, I mean, I think I love that idea that we would have a language model for each of our courses, and that would enhance the student learning. I mean, that is a small but amazing idea that will really revolutionize how we teach in the future. One of the skills that I always say is, curiosity, flexibility, and adaptability. I think, to me, those three things are going to be really key. And that applies to the student as well as the educator. Because if you are not open to learning this, you're going to become irrelevant very quickly, or your skills will become very irrelevant very quickly. So that is a great segue, actually, to we have a couple of questions from our audience. And I'm just going to read what's in our chat here. It says, on entering demographic profile and clinical data into an AI system, can the software suggest investigations to be ordered? So I believe they mean lab studies, provide tentative diagnosis with a recommended pharmaceutical prescription, and refine the diagnosis and prescription based on the investigation results. I think, Joshua, this is talking about ChatDoc. So I think they're asking if the system, if we're putting in the clinical data, is it going to provide what tests to order, what the diagnosis will be, and what the plan will be? Where is ChatDoc's ability at this point?
Yes, similar to that. But I'm looking at ChatDoc state right now. We don't have that yet, but after we go further, then we'd integrate that kind of, because there's a lot of risk at this point, and no investor would want to invest in a startup that's not making revenue, but is taking this huge risk into pharmaceuticals and drug discovery.
Yeah. I believe you can go to ChatDoc. Is it chatdoc.com, Joshua, to play around with the...
It's HTTPS ChatDoc-XI. I haven't purchased the domain yet because we'll still
put a link on our YouTube recording.
HTTPS ChatDoc.
We'll put the link on our recording later. Thank you. Thank you for your question. And then we have one more where, what are some unexpected benefits or insights that AI has provided in each of your fields that you didn't anticipate? Mark, we'll start with you.
Unexpected benefits. That's interesting.
Great question.
Yeah, that makes me think quite a bit. I'm going to say its ability to allow students who are unfamiliar with content to develop an almost instant rapport with it. And the example I'll use here is computer code. There is a class that I teach called Tools and Technologies where students effectively form a software development group, and then I throw them a business problem, and the idea is that they come together as a team because it's meant to mimic the job market, and then of course solve that issue. And in the past, when I did precisely this, students would do things like writing pseudocode, for example, because they're not computer scientists, they're humanities. And that was effective because the thing I was actually trying to teach was the problem solving skill, and so on. But now we can actually, through AI, through code-free platforms, these students who are not computer scientists can develop working apps that they can then take in front of investors, have portfolio pieces they can show off and say, here's how it would work if I had a budget, if I had a dev team and DevOps behind me, right? It really allows a kind of polymath approach for students now because they can I don't want to call them become experts in everything, right? Because that takes a lot of study, but it absolutely broadens the spectrum of what's available and what a student can do. And myself too, right? I consider myself a student as well. What I can now do just with access to this technology is amazing, particularly in my opinion, graphic design. I am not a great renderer or artist or designer, but with access to
I would disagree with that. I've seen your work.
That's flattering. But yeah, with access to these tools, I can render and develop and build some amazing things that, you know, I never would have been able to unless I spent 15, 20 years, you know, with art. So the most surprising thing for me then, this is all summing up to say, is the democratization of skill, right? It gives access to these skills to people who would either never have had them or never would have had the ability, whether that be time or money or whatever, to study them. It allows them access to it. I think that's a great thing.
Yeah. Joshua, what has been most surprising for you in your journey?
Well, the most surprising is combining images with large language models. I noticed a few companies are doing that by just by looking at a person's face. They, like you mentioned, sentiment analysis. By looking at a person's face, they can provide better health-related information. You know, like telling that, oh, the person looks sad or happy, or you know, like that. And Sword Health is doing something similar to that, except it's more on therapy, physical therapy, tailored around that. So I saw a video of a certain lady who was, you know, practicing her physical therapy, and the AI assistant of Sword Health, which is called Phoenix, was analyzing or recognizing her patterns while providing advice on what she should do next. You know, combining the two of those was just pretty amazing. I was not expecting that.
Yeah. I think for me, it's been, in addition to the democratization, I think it's the accessibility of this technology. I think to me, it's not quite the same level of an inflection point as the internet was, but it's up there in terms of how game-changing it has been in terms of accessibility. I do think that the ability for us to learn, it's really going to shift how we teach and how we learn. I am as I'm watching my own kids kind of start using these tools, they're both in high school, and use these tools. And I'm just sitting here thinking, I teach in a university. I'm a little afraid of the students, like my kids, who are going to come completely knowing how to use these tools. And it's probably that fear that drives me and motivates me to learn all of this, because I was like, I need to keep up with you with the homework that you're getting, because I don't know it as well as they do, right? Because they're immersed in it. Whereas for me, it's something that I'm passionate about, and I learn it actively, right? They are innately growing up to, again, digitally AI, right? Natively AI, excuse me, because it's the next level and the next phase of what the digitally native generation is. And so for me, I think it's been the accessibility piece and the ease with which, the number of times I've kind of heard students who are using various AI tools and said, why didn't the teacher explain it to me this way? I totally get it now. Right. And it was in ChatGPT or Wolfram Alpha or whatever it was, right? The ability to really synthesize it down to the level where that learner needs it to be is just an amazing way of democratizing it and accessing this stuff. Well, thank you very much for our questions from the audience. Thank you to both of our guests, Joshua and Mark, for joining us for this very stimulating conversation. This wraps up episode 23 of Decoding AI in Healthcare. I want to thank our audience for joining us. We will have a link to this recording tomorrow to share in case you missed it. And thank you, Joshua and Mark, for your time.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yeah, thank you for having me, Ms. Dipu.
All right, Hitvi, handing it back to you.
Thank you so much. So I would like to thank everybody for joining us today. And before I conclude, I would say from my side, I'm so excited for the future of AI, how it is going to change the future and the future generations as well. And as I conclude this episode, I'd like to extend a heartfelt thank you to our brilliant guests, Joshua, Dr. Mark, and Dr. Dipu, for sharing their invaluable insights on future of AI. And to our audience, your engagement and questions have made this discussion even more enlightening. So until we meet again, stay curious and keep exploring the possibilities of AI. Thank you and take care. Thank you so much, everybody.
Yeah.